Dear students, in the previous class, we have discussed consumers' response to income change. We have derived the angel curve and also the angel's law. In the present class, we will discuss consumers' response to price change, and we will explain graphically the derivation of the individual demand curve and the effect of a change in price on quantity demanded is more complex than the effect of a change in income on quantity demanded. Geometrically, this is because a change in price involves two effects. One is when there is a change in the price of the commodity, the intercept of the budget line will shift. A second is when the price of a commodity changes, the slope of the budget line will also shift. So, geometrically, a change in the price of a commodity has two effects, whereas in the case of income, slope of the budget line will remain the same, only the intercept will change. So, as both slope and intercept changes in the case of a price change, moving to a new utility maximizing choice, that is moving to a new utility maximizing bundle, involves not only moving to another indifference curve, it also involves a change in the marginal rate of substitution. So, when price changes, two analytically different effects come into play. One is the substitution effect. The substitution effect. It states that when price of one commodity changes relative to the price of another commodity, the price ratio changes. As the price ratio changes, individual will now substitute the relatively cheap commodity for the relatively expensive commodity. So, the change in the quantity demanded resulting from a change in the relative price of X or Y is known as substitution effect. And even if the individual stay on the same indifference curve, even if the level of utility remains constant, the consumption patterns will be different, because when the price of one commodity changes, Px by Py changes, and equilibrium requires that MRS also changes. So, we have a different position on the same indifference curve. The second effect is when the price of a commodity changes, it will affect the real income of the consumer. For example, when the price of a commodity decreases, the purchasing power of a given money income increases, or we will say that the real income increases. As a result, the person will purchase more units of both the commodities or one commodity, and the cases we will see. And this effect, the quantity demanded resulting from a change in the real income is known as income effect. So when the price of a commodity changes, quantity demanded of the commodity changes due to both substitution effect and income effect. That means we have to decompose a price effect into substitution effect and into an income effect. And in the case of income effect, when the price of the commodity changes, the consumer cannot stay on the same indifference curve. He has to move to a different indifference curve associated with a different budget line. So we have to consider these two effects associated with the price change. But remember, before considering the decomposition of substitution effect, price effect into a substitution effect and an income effect, we first discuss the price effect in general. Then we will attempt a decomposition of price effect into substitution effect and income effect in the subsequent section. Now, suppose that to attract more customers on weekdays, the owner of a bar reduces the price of drinks. When the price of drinks is reduced, there will be an increase in the number of customers visiting the bar, and as such, quantity demanded of the commodity will increase. And a consumer's quantity demanded of the commodity depends on his preferences, his limited income, prices of commodities, drinks, etc. And as we know, indifference curves are used to represent preferences, and budget line is used to represent the income constraints. And given the preferences represented by indifference curve, income constraints represented by the budget line, we can derive the relationship between price and quantity demanded theoretically. We can derive the relationship between price and quantity demanded given the preferences of the consumer represented by the indifference curves and his limited money income represented by the budget line. And we will establish, using this information, the theoretical relationship between price and quantity demanded. To explain this, suppose that we are considering two commodities, X and Y, and also that the budget constraint is I is equal to Px into X plus Py into Y. The income constraint is given as Px into X plus Py into Y. Suppose that I is equal to 10, Px is equal to 2, Py is equal to 1. Then the budget line becomes 10 is equal to Px, 2x plus y, 2x plus y, given that we have information about the prices of the commodities and income. And the slope of the budget line dy by dx with the di is equal to 0. That is, change in income is equal to 0 is minus Px by Py is equal to minus 2. Or if you take the absolute value, it is 2. Now, let us draw this information in the form of a graph. Now, this is y, qy, qx, and consider this point. This is I by Py. In this example, this I by Py is equal to 10 and this is I by Px. Using the numerical example, this value is 10 and this value is 5, the budget line. The budget line. The x-intercept is 5, y-intercept is 10. And consumer maximizes his utility by consuming a commodity bundle where the budget line is tangent to the indifference curve U1. Budget line is tangent to the indifference curve U1 at say point A. Point A. When the price of the commodity X is Px. Now, let me consider it as Px1. Px1. Now, when the price X, Px is Px1, our consumer consumes x1 units. When the price is Px1, our consumer consumes x1 units and maximizes his utility. So we have the point of tangency between the indifference curve and the budget line where the consumer maximizes his utility. So we have a point on the demand curve, denote it as small letter a. Now suppose that the price of x decreases to Px2 is equal to 1. Price of x. In that case, this becomes minus Px by Px, Py is equal to minus 1. And the budget line shift or tilt along the x-axis. The y-intercept remain at I by Py as the price of y is not affected, income of the consumer is also not affected, only the price of x changes. The budget line tilt outward or rotate along the x-axis and the new equilibrium point is again defined as tangency between the new budget line and the intercept is I by Px2 and this is x2 when the price decreases to Px2 and a point P, a new point P on the now this is 10 in terms of the numerical example, this is 0.5, this is 10. Now if the price of x again decreases, you have another point like this, then I by Px3 and the new equilibrium is U3 and point C and x3 when price is Px3, that is C. Now if you join together these points, you will get a price consumption curve. If you join together these points, that is the points of equilibrium between or tangency between the budget line and the indifference curve, you will get what is known as the price consumption curve. And joining together, you will get ABC, you will get the demand curve, that is dx function of Px keeping Py and I constant. The bar imply that the variables beyond the bar are held constant. So we have the usual downward sloping demand curve obtained from the point of tangency between indifference curves and budget lines. And as you know, each point on the demand curve, A, B, C, etc., is a point on the tangency between indifference curve and budget line. So, at each point, the consumer maximizes utility. And each point on the demand curve shows how much quantity of X a consumer is willing to and able to purchase at various prices. If Px is Px1, he purchases X1 units, Px2, he purchases X2 units, Px3, he purchases X3 units, like that. Now, this is how the demand curve is for ordinary goods. So, this diagram shows the quantity demanded of commodity X associated with the different prices for an ordinary goods. Ordinary goods where dou Xj by dou Pj is less than 0. That is, there is a negative relationship between price and quantity demanded. But there are some situations in which the demand curve will be positively sloped. Such a possibility is there. That is, there are situations in which dou Xj by dou Pj is greater than 0. Such a situation is known as Giffen good. Giffen good. Giffen good is a situation in which there is a positive relationship between price and quantity demanded. Now, suppose that initially the situation is like this, and for a given price of X, given price of Y, income of the consumer, etc., the consumer is in equilibrium with the U1, and when the price of X is given by when the price of X is given by Px1, price of I, Py, etc., we have the equilibrium here. This is I by Py, I by Px1. Equilibrium is here, quantity is X1. X1 for price Px1. The initial situation. Now, suppose that price of X decreases to Px2, budget line shift outwards, and the equilibrium shift from point A to point B, so that our consumer now consume X2 units when the price decreases from Px1 to Px2. So, we have a demand curve like this. The demand curve is upward sloping and price consumption curve is backward bending. This is the price consumption curve. Price consumption curve is backward bending, demand curve is upward sloping. So, such commodities are known as Giffen goods. The reason why we have Giffen goods will be discussed in detail in a later class. So, in terms of price effect, we classify commodities into ordinary and Giffen. In the case of ordinary goods, demand curve is negatively sloped. In the case of Giffen goods, it is upward sloping. In terms of price effect, income effect, commodities are classified into normal and inferior. Normal itself is divided into luxury and necessity. Remember these points. In terms of income effect, normal and inferior. In terms of price effect, ordinary and Giffen goods. And this is how we derive the demand curve from indifference curve analysis. That is the comparative static analysis of a price change most of the commodities obey the law of demand. One exception is the case of given goods that we will discuss in detail in a later class.